collapse of the Soviet Union was one of the greatest catastrophes of the 20th century. Hassan is right. It was catastrophic for former Soviet states. It was catastrophic for the world. It was catastrophic even for Americans. Y'all can get mad, but facts are facts. There were 8.4 million excess deaths immediately after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Hyperinflation reached upwards of 2,000%. In Russia alone, there were 4 million excess deaths. The life expectancy for Russian men declined by 6 years to the levels seen in the 1950s and the 1960s. Prostitution was everywhere. There was severe malnutrition, there was mass unemployment, and people were dying due to cardiovascular diseases. There was also the
what is this? Maybe there's too much capitalism? Oh,
Abkhazian Wars between Abkhazia and Georgia. There was the Chechen Wars. There was the Nagorno-Karabakh situation. The collapse of the Soviet Union led to the collapse of leftist movements.
Person Nagorno-Karabakh. That's not.
It's globally, and it led to the collapse of American standards of living and our rights. Look at this chart. You see that the number of Americans.
One of the things that people don't realize is that, like, without the Soviet Union, we are not going to the moon, right? Like, there is no technological innovation that was born and bred here under a fully capitalist mode of production, right? We just did that shit to flex on our ops. People don't realize that. And this is not even like contested, right? This is, I had this conversation with, you know, someone who I wouldn't consider to be a socialist by any means whatsoever, right? Neil deGrasse Tyson and I had this conversation when we were flying back to Los Angeles, where we talked exclusively about this, like about how like the USSR and the Soviets and their innovation is what caused Americans to engage in the space race in a meaningful manner.
Married and owned a home craters after 1991. That's not a coincidence. The collapse of the Soviet Union is the reason why we don't have social safety nets. It's harder to get a job. We're making less money because the American capitalist class no longer had to worry about the external pressures or the fear of a working class revolution. The Soviet Union is the reason why your parents were able to afford a home and get a high paying job. It's also the reason why Black Americans had civil rights. Lyndon Baines Johnson specifically said that he feared the international repercussions from the USSR and African independent nations, which is why he passed the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Since the USSR doesn't exist anymore, the elite don't feel the need to give us any scraps. So yes, the collapse of the Soviet Union was one of the greatest catastrophes of the 20th century that is still impacting us today.
Yeah, this is not even like an ideological argument about loving the USSR or anything. This is arguably just a correct assessment of history, a correct interpretation of historical events that unfolded. And Americans are so unbelievably propagandized that this objectively correct statement is seen as a bridge too far by so many. There were people that were yelling at me saying that I'm Vladimir Putin, that like Adolf Hitler is the one who wrote my speech, right? It's so crazy.